Elections, Parties, and Democracy, Part 1. So this is the first part of our section on elections, parties, and democracy. There will be a second part. The second part will focus mostly on the Electoral College, which is something I think every citizen should know about. Objectives for today. We're going to look at the role elections play in a democracy. We want to examine who votes and who does not, a topic we already touched on earlier. We want to understand a little bit, at least, start to understand how people vote. We're going to look briefly at the U.S. party system. And at the end, we are going to examine the role money plays in U.S. elections. We are going to look at different types of election financing systems. What are the functions of elections? The authors of your textbook point out that elections are primarily symbolic exercises. Those, what they call symbolic exercises, help to tie the masses to the established order. They offer the masses an opportunity to participate in the political system, but typically voting does not enable the masses to determine public policy. So should the country do this or that? Should Social Security be privatized or not? Typically, elections do not decide these kind of matters. So elections are a means of selecting people, not policy. And in fact, most voters make their decision based on a candidate's image, not the candidate's policy. Theoretically speaking, a voter could cast his or her vote based on 3 criteria. First of all, one can vote according to party allegiance. These are these people who have a strong identification with one of the parties and always vote Republican, always vote Democrat. You might know some of those people. Then some people vote based on a candidate's image. And lastly, and that's the smallest group of voters actually, they're those voters who cast their vote based on policy consideration. So these are voters who first determine what policies are important to them, say global warming, Social Security, foreign policy. Then they determine the candidates stand on these issues and then find the candidate who is closest to them in terms of the candidate's issue positions. This policy type of voting requires a lot of information, and given that we learned already that the U.S. public tends to be not very well informed, this is really the least frequent type of voting. Who votes? Turnout in presidential elections ranges typically between 50% in the 2000 election, higher 57% in the 2012 election. In fact, it was even higher than 57% in 2008, the first Obama election. Typically, however, it is much lower in off-year presidential elections and really dismally low in state and local elections as well as primary elections. Also note that turnout among the young youth voters is typically even lower. So older generations are actually more likely to vote than younger generations. Why is turnout so low and actually lower than in really almost all other democracies? Think about the vote choice. You can explain whether or not someone will vote by looking at benefits and costs. This is really an economic model. Economists explain human behavior by comparing costs and benefits. So in other words, you attend college because you hope that benefits of a college education will outweigh its costs, a perfectly rational decision. What are benefits associated with voting? Yeah, if your candidate wins, there might actually be a substantial benefit if you are one of those rare policy voters. You might feel good about your candidate winning, or you might just feel good about the act of voting in and of itself. Something called citizen duty. On the other hand, there are costs associated with voting. Registration, voting on election day, maybe making a line, maybe standing in line for a long time, collecting information. These costs are not overwhelmingly high, but for some people they might be substantial. According to a cost-benefit analysis, voting only makes sense if benefits outweigh the costs. Unlike most other Western democracies, the United States has a two-party system. And although citizens' attachment to the two parties has decreased, a process called de-alignment, third parties typically do not succeed in elections. There are several reasons for this. The most important reason is the winner-takes-all electoral system and difficult requirements imposed by the states to get on the ballot. Are there viable third parties? Yes, there are. Please check out the Green Party, a party with lots of environmental issues on top of their agenda, but not only defined by environmental sustainability issues. If you look at their platform, you will see that they have a much larger platform. Or take the Libertarian Party, also an alternative to Republicans and Democrats. How should elections be funded? Here we are going to talk about two different types of funding system, public versus private campaign financing. Again, most democracies, the US is really unique in many, many aspects, rely on a public financing model where government funding is used to run campaigns. Each candidate receives the same amount of money and cannot raise or spend additional monies. On the other hand, in the United States, candidates and the parties raise most of the monies needed for the campaign by themselves. And how costly are those campaigns? Let me give you a few facts. The 2012 elections were the most expensive ever, with a total price tag of around $7 billion, fueled by millions of dollars in unrestricted donations as Republicans and Democrats vied for the control of the White House, Congress, and state governments. Obama raised more than $1,072 million, spent most of it. Romney raised and spent almost as much, $992 million. On average, the winning Senate candidates spent more than $10 million. Some of them are much more expensive. And it took, on average, more than $1.6 million to win a House seat. Where's this money coming from? The link below presents comprehensive information about the money raised by the candidates. Please look at it at your leisure. It also includes a list of major donors to the Obama and Romney campaigns. For instance, the major donor to the Obama campaign was James Simons, a hedge fund manager with $5 million. The biggest donors to the Romney campaign were Sheldon and Miriam Adelson, casino owners, with a combined donation of $30 million. There's one other website I want to direct your attention to. a website called opensecrets.org, where you can get much more details about Fat Cat contributors, and you can actually see how much money was given to each candidate by different organizations, lobbyists, etc. This is a website every voter should look at before casting a ballot, because this website really shows where is a candidate's money coming from. Does money drive elections? The answer depends on how cynical you are. The authors of our textbook argue that the high costs of media campaigning add to the influence of wealthy contributors and thus to an elite system in electoral politics. Candidates have to spend a huge chunk of their time campaigning and fundraising. And this is not likely to change in the future. We are likely to continue to see the trend of ever increasing campaign expenditures, especially since the Supreme Court has held that campaign expenditures are protected as free speech, including expenditures by independent organizations, corporations, and unions. As a result, campaign expenditures and donations cannot be capped or limited. Is this, according to your opinion, the right way of financing elections? What kind of campaign finance system, public versus private, is preferable to you and why? Again, there is no ultimate answer, but I want you to engage with this information and these readings to think about the repercussions of different campaign finance systems.